Greetings, members, one and all. I am with Leor Gans from Wealth Research Group, and we are discussing a lot of different things with regards to precious metals and what moves those prices. And there's a lot going on in the world right now. And there's a lot of different fronts. We have essentially war either waging or very close to waging in multiple areas around the world. But I wanted to focus on some economic factors as well, too, with regards to silver specifically, because a lot of things could drive the price in one direction or another. And it seems like it could go either way, for sure. What do you think, Leor?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. If we're talking about silver, I think that in regards to what's happening with China, I think that people are missing the big picture. China's population has, in the last 40 years, been told that their savings should be invested in housing. As you well know, if we go back 45 years, with the invention of this idea of the economic zones, we've changed, or the Western civilization has brought industrialization to fishing villages in China and created mega cities, the largest ever transformation of any country in history. And during that time, the Chinese people have been told that their savings should go into brick and mortar. And if you look at their population and the amount of housing units in the country, if you average it out, there's about 2 apartments for each person. It's the world's greatest real estate bubble. And it's built on debt, a lot of debt, and a lot of corruption. And if you compare this to the subprime mortgage crisis in the United States, at that particular time, housing was 8% of US GDP. In China, housing is 25% of GDP. It's essentially a construction economy. And if you think about how the next generation is going to look at housing, it's going to look at it very differently than the previous generation. This generation is losing a fortune in housing, both because housing prices are collapsing and because everything is financed with debt, and a lot of the developers are falling apart. The banks are trying to weather the storm because they're unaffected. Unlike the United States, these are not investment banks, and they didn't participate in the bubble in a severe way. But still, we're talking about 3 times the size compared to the economy of the subprime mortgage crisis. And so this is a housing crisis that will take, who knows, 10 to 15 years to really play out. That's a generation of people that will now come to view housing as the last thing is a safe haven. If you look at stocks, the average Chinese person does not invest in their stock market. The stock market is not part of the daily life of middle-class Chinese people. And so traditionally, they will go back to what they are most familiar with and what their grandfathers and grandmothers told them, which is to save in precious metals. And so for most Chinese people, silver is a precious metal. It's very different than in the West, where it's mostly industrial use. And there are people like you and I that actually buy silver, but we're in the minority. We're in the drastic minority. So as you see that is real silver, that is physical silver that's going to be needed for around 1 billion Chinese people. And obviously, not all of them are going to buy, but the demand for silver is actually going to come back strong after 30 years where 1/8 of the world's population was not accumulating silver.
And China also is known for its citizens buying gold as well, too. But gold is pricing many out of the market. And, it makes me wonder, coupled with that, as well as the demand for silver for solar panels in China specifically. I've heard a lot of solar farms going up, even some of them being put on the side of mountains. It's crazy. what's going on there with that. Is that in a bubble too, though?
Define bubble. What do you mean the bubble?
Are they producing more solar panels than what is needed or what they can export out? Or, with this real estate bubble, could it be that other things are being manufactured with the potential of being overproduced?
Unlikely. Unlikely that you would have oversupply of solar panel to the extent that in the next 4 or 5 years they don't have to produce any or stuff like that. If that's your concern, that they've bought silver ahead of time for their solar industries.
That's kind of where I was going, because if you think about where silver's price has been heading, it's been going up, especially since March of 2024 here. So maybe they are buying a lot of it before it goes up much more. And if things start to turn sour, especially with the real estate market, you're saying we may have 10 years left before that bubble bursts in the real estate market, right?
I'm saying it's going to take a long time to unwind, if at all. Current day China, as it's built, as a communistic, centralistic regime, is essentially it's basically about survival. Because of the one-child policy, for the last 30 years, there have been over 330 million abortions in China. When you think about that staggering number, and the one-child policy has also led to the fact that there are way more men than women, because when mothers were pregnant, if they saw it's a girl, many of them chose to end the pregnancy and get pregnant again with a boy. And so you have in China things that exist only in China. Basically, it's a country that is on the verge of severe crises, and that's plural crises, not crisis. And we're talking about demographically that they're the worst country on the planet right now. If they're thinking about any military operations, the military age men are shrinking. The women, they don't want to have children because their mothers taught them about the one-child policy, and so a family is basically a child and a pet. And this is a country that only rose because the West allowed it to rose. Their entire economy is based on the straits that lead the waterways that lead up to China staying open, because they import 60% of the oil. It's so easy to end their entire economy is a bubble. Basically, it's the most simplistic and uncomplexed economy in the world for its size. It could shrink by half in 1 year if the United States chooses to block off some of the key straits on the way to China. There's so many levers that the United States can pull. It's not a robust, unique, diversified economy like in the United States and others. So to answer your question, I think that the Chinese people are going to lose a lot of the trust that they had in government. And going back even to ancient China, the Chinese people have never believed in God, in a monotheistic theory of the universe. They're not part of the three monotheistic religions. They're atheist by their core. They believe in a higher power, but they don't believe in particularly in God. And as a culture, through thousands of years, what they have believed in is that whoever rules over them, at this point the CCP, only gets to rule if they're not corrupt. But if the populace thinks that the government is corrupt and that it's working against them, in their culture, it is embedded that they should revolt. And so that is why all of these Caesars throughout time in China and today the CCP, they apply so much power and censorship over the population because the population knows it has the right to take them down if they so feel. And I think that you have to be aware of that. It is not a normal culture. Like you can't view it as you view democracies of the West. It's a starkly different culture, almost like two civilizations that evolved separately, and that means that you have to humbly realize you don't know a lot about how they will behave once both the real estate problems continue, and if the United States decides to raise up the notch on China, because obviously there's basically a hot war between them on many fronts.
When you think about how that all ties back into silver, it could go a lot of different ways because of what you're talking about here, and very quickly. We talk about the housing market that could last another 10 years, but there's other things that are going on now, especially with the Shanghai Gold Exchange, with the difference between the prices in the Shanghai Gold Exchange for silver as opposed to the Western markets. Their vaults are very low right now, and we've been seeing the COMEX vaults increase recently, and so it's very interesting to see how that's moving and how that could tie into everything we've been talking about within the country, the dynamics within the country. It makes it very hard to predict. What's their economy look like right now, and how do you think this could play out for silver? And maybe the two different scenarios, a bullish and bearish scenario for silver, given what's going on right now.
For one, silver is obviously one of the unique commodities in the world in that it trades for half of its all-time high set 44 years ago, and repeated in 2011. So that's unique. You don't see that in the 30 major commodities that trade freely. None of them have that characteristic where they trade for half of their all-time highs, and their all-time highs were set 44 years ago. That's entirely unique. So that's one thing, and that tells you that the upside for silver is certainly staggering. That's just on the surface of it. There's so much upside for silver yet. If we just think about how much ounces of silver it takes to buy an ounce of gold, the gold-silver ratio, it's about 80 to 1. And in a more developed, mature bull market, it's going to get to about 50 or 40 to 1. So silver has a lot to go. That's one thing. But I think that the main thing to understand is that in the last 40 years, you've had a country whose sole purpose in this world was to sell the West reliably and predictably commodities. That was Russia. And that role has ended. And so when you look at the way that commodities trade around the world and how predictably and seamlessly countries would buy commodities from each other during the hyper-globalization phase, which is from the day the Soviet Union fell up until the COVID virus started. And in those 30 years, commodities were deflating around the world because the supply was always there. The open seas were always peaceful, and you barely had problems. Look, this T-shirt, probably made in China. I haven't even looked, but was made in China. Came on a container ship to Rotterdam port in Holland. It got lowered from the dock. Armani put his sticker on it, and then it went on another ship. It went to the United States, where it was sold for $30 or $40. That world is ended. There is no globalization anymore. The United States has neither the capacity nor the political will to maintain the Bretton Woods system. Their navy is not competitively big as it was up until the 80s, and it just cannot facilitate their classic Bretton Woods role. That's why you're seeing de-dollarization. That's why you're seeing deglobalization, and that's why you're seeing the rise of all sorts of ideas of where are we going from here? How are we going to evolve from here? And in that world,
Petrodollar's dead too.
correct. Essentially, you are now in a transition period, and everything is on the table. Personally, I believe that if Biden wins this elections in November, the way that the United States government is set up, with the key personnel being the stupidest and most reckless people that I've ever seen in government, I think we're going to some sort of a World War III scenario. It's when I say World War III, just don't think about World War One or two, because they're not. This is not how it's going to look like at all. It's very different. But just imagine a world where multiple big fronts are happening. Even the United States is threatened directly, something that you haven't seen since 1990, and yeah, very different world. And again, I blame the Biden administration for this. They're just two of the key people are basically unqualified for office. That's Blinken and Sullivan, and they have very big roles. Lloyd Austin, in my opinion, he's not even he cannot function as Minister of Defense. It's just Secretary of Defense. It's preposterous. On the flip side, I think that if the Americans wise up and elect Trump for office, I think that what you'll get is you'll get Chamberlain being replaced by Churchill in 1938, before the war starts, instead of after the war starts. And whoever doesn't understand what I'm saying is Neville Chamberlain was Prime Minister of Britain. He went to speak with Hitler, came back to England and said, "I've struck a deal with this guy. That's it. We're done. It's going to be rosy from here on." This is 1938. So I think that's basically what the Biden administration is. That's them. They are disrespected the world over. Anthony Blinken is a very disrespected American politician, and he almost brought the Chinese to the point where they were ready for war with the United States. And it was only the world's community that brought Xi Jinping to San Francisco, where they could hash it out. But it was very close to a conflict, to a full-blown conflict, like head on. We were very close. So I think that is one thing. If Trump gets elected, I think that we have a chance to transition into the deglobalized world with a set of new agreements in place that are actually going to create a lot of stability, and a lot of regions are going to prosper independently of each other, with connecting economies, which will be countries that can work both with the Russian bloc, the Chinese bloc, the American bloc, the Europeans, the South Americans, the Australians, and the Japanese, the Indians. There will be ways to create this scenario of multiple regions all prospering, and actually a very peaceful world. It's not going to be peaceful because everybody gets along with each other, but it's going to be peaceful because the deterrence that the United States can project will be real, and you will actually have something to lose by antagonizing the United States. Whereas what Clinton, Obama, and Biden brought to the table is that you can do anything to the United States, and the United States, in order to maintain this convenient quote-unquote peace, they will allow all of their adversaries to strengthen at the expense of the American middle class, at the expense of the American military, at the expense of American norms and American businesses. And that's as I said, I think that's the most reckless and stupid strategy I've ever seen. Trying to buy off adversaries that don't see eye to eye with you, instead of standing your ground, be true to your values, and use the fact that you are the best in the world in most things, and you have the best assets, and therefore you should lead, because this is for all the marbles. I don't want to sound dramatic, but it's dramatic times.
It sure is. So many important issues for sure. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see where silver goes and gold as well too. But silver, you mentioned all the headroom that it has there, and going back to China, and because I think China is so important in this. They are the C in the BRICS, and the de-dollarization. When you think of de-dollarization, people think of the BRICS. And the effect that they may have. And even though it's slow, it's a slow chipping away at the dollar. And now the petrodollar is gone. The dollar is not going away anytime soon. About 58% of reserves are in the dollar, but about 80% plus are used for international transactions, even yet today without the petrodollar. And so I don't know, with being on the verge of a variation or a version of World War III to international cooperation with multiple bilateral or trilateral agreements that could come in peacetime. How is that going to look for silver? My feeling is it seems like silver's price is going to stabilize, maybe even go up, because increased demand with increased healed supply chains, as opposed to the other scenario where we see maybe less demand, broken supply chains, depressed economies. The price of silver could probably fall, and maybe even fall into the low 20s. What do you think?
In general, I think that once the Fed starts cutting interest rates, the housing sector in the United States and all the interest rate sensitive parts of the economy will flourish, and that plays well for commodities. To me, I believe that silver is going to head higher. It should trade for 60 to 80 an ounce by the end of the decade. We're going a lot higher with commodities. There's no question about the fact that commodities have been undermined in the last 20 years because of Russia. Russia was able to just supply the world with anything that the world needed. And with AI needing enormous amounts of electrification, and with all this infrastructure that the United States government basically allowed to discontinue because they offshored so much of and outsourced so much of their industrial capacity, all of that will need to be rebuilt and come back. The need for commodities is going to be so much bigger than you've seen in the last 20 to 25 years. It's a different world. So silver can go a heck of a lot higher.
But that's in a healthy economic situation, right? But let's say there's a recession.
We are entering a very healthy economic situation. I'm not talking about like whether or not there'll be a recession. There's recessions in the United States from 1776. There's a recession every 8 years on average. Recessions just, they're part of the business cycle. But if you think about where the big picture is for the United States, you are on the verge of leading the most important part of the fourth industrial revolution. You're going to dominate AI, which will change the world. You're going to dominate space, which is the final frontier. The potential for the United States to grow, to also grow so much that that if you have the right leader in place and a 100-year plan, you can probably close the deficit to more than half of what it is, the national debt. The problem is that in the last 30 years, you've been accustomed to a very slow growing economy. And it's just because you've let everybody else take your positions in exchange for this fantasy of peace. But instead of waking up after 9/11 and realizing that the world is not there to make peace with you, you need to compete. You kept, not you personally, obviously, but you kept on ignoring the fact that China is stealing your IP, and that China is not a developing economy anymore. It's a developed economy, and it should meet standards of child labor and everything else. And just by turning a blind eye to all that, and then electing, basically a little college grad that knew nothing about the real world, and actually re-electing him for a second term, and having 8 years of Obama, you really did a lot of damage, both to yourselves and to other parts of the world. And I think that once you realize that the golden goose that keeps laying eggs is right there where you are, you have everything that you need to grow, and to grow real fast. It's just you're managed so badly by the last three Democratic presidents that it's awful, and it's just the potential is so immense. If you think about just your security, you have two vast oceans, uninterrupted, on your east and west. No one can challenge you. No one. There's not a power in the universe that can challenge you. You have friendly neighbors to the north and south. In the south, you have now your biggest trading partner with Mexico. And there's so much potential there if you run that border correctly. That you can build a highway that goes straight through the heart of the United States all the way to Colombia, and have one of the most robust economic areas in the world, with the potential that you have in Mexico. Just the potential of Mexico and the United States integrating is immense. And then the partnerships that you can create around the world are incredible. But it has to happen with a administration that is respected. And I can tell you, when Blinken shows up in other people's countries, he comes there with these insane ideas that he learned in Harvard or in Columbia, or somewhere in these think tanks that are like self-anointed, as if God put them on the earth to tell other people how to live. Nobody cares about that. No, everybody hates that. Everybody hates that. And on the flip side, you had somebody like Jared Kushner, who probably is the best American to ever set foot in the Middle East. And for the first year, he just sits there and shuts up and lets all of the different leaders explain to him their cultures, their issues, their problems, their agendas. And he figured out a way to create normalization between Israel and many of the Arab countries, and many of the Muslim countries. If this was somebody else, they would have won the Nobel Peace Prize, of course. And once Biden won the 2020 election, all he had to do was sign the dotted line, and you would have normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And just to explain to people how important that is, Saudi Arabia controls the Sunni world. The Sunni world is 85% of Muslims. 85% of Muslims, and it's the sacred ground of Mecca, which is the most important place in Islam. Jerusalem in Israel is the most sacred place for the Jewish religion, and in Israel you have all of the sacred grounds for where Jesus was born, where Jesus did this, etc. You would have basically normalized the three major religions of the world. You cannot get any better than that. And Blinken, Sullivan, and Biden found a way to screw it up. It will be remembered in 300, 400, 500 years as the greatest screw up in human history, along with the pullback from Afghanistan, which is the direct Blinken disaster. I'm just not sure how you guys have not applied more political pressure on your elected leaders to disqualify this person. I think if you think about the potential for the future, if you have the right leadership, I started with your borders. Inside of your country, you have the Mississippi River. It's the world's greatest logistical waterway. The amount of new cities you can build on its banks and run your economy cheaper than anywhere else in the world. You have found fracking, which created the world's most low-cost oil and natural gas. You have that. That's yours. All you need to do is the right administration to unlock the potential of your energy security. You have the most arable land. So in other words, you can never have any famines or shortage of food. You have the financial centers that are the most advanced in the world in New York and now in Florida. I mean, you have the best tech anywhere in the world, anywhere. It's not even funny. And that's growing and growing. Your potential is amazing. And everybody wants to come there. If you only created a better immigration policy, people from around the world will come. Look at your tech CEOs. They're all of them are. Microsoft has a CEO that's from Indian descent, and I can go on Google, etc. Look, it's all up to you guys. And if you go the right way, the world will go the right way. And if you go the wrong way, then I think that we will have a very painful lesson, all of us around the world. And the lessons are real. They cannot get any more real. Because let me just explain the threat. Because Americans just don't understand the threat. They wake up in the morning, they go to their Starbucks, they go to their jog and this and that, and watch the ball game, and they don't understand threats because they haven't been threatened so many years. If the Biden administration continues to fail, you will have interballistic continental missiles pointed at every major city in the United States, both from the Russians, the Iranians, and the Chinese. That's your future. For the first time, you will actually be threatened in a major way. As long as Americans have mental diseases where they think they can change their genders and all that crap that happens in a decadent society, you're like that slow boiling frog that doesn't know it's being cooked, and because it's happening so slowly, but it's happening, and that's why I tell you, the next few months are going to decide the next 40 years, basically. And that's important for people to remember. In terms of your economic outlook, you have the potential to grow at 4 and 4.5% GDP. And just so you understand what that means, for the average American family, growing at that pace means that they will grow their wealth by an extra $150,000 to $200,000 in their careers, an extra on top of whatever it was per capita. So for a family of 5, that means almost an extra $1 million. That's insane. So the potential is all ahead of you. But as I said, you have to wake up because you're like a Ferrari engine in neutral, and you've grown used to being in neutral. You have to put it in gear.
It's a good analogy, and with that, I think that is the best way to kind of encourage all Americans, and it would be nice if some policymakers would listen to this interview to wake them up as well too. There's a lot at stake, and thank you, Lior. I think that's as an American myself, it was encouraging to hear, and we want to be proud of our country, but we also we have to think about the future there, because precious metals are important, but obviously you want to be able to have a good healthy economy and good strong families and everything else. So I think with that, I think you're telling us that silver's got a strong potential ahead, and I think that probably either way, likely silver's probably gonna continue on its path in a northerly direction up. Well, Lior, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today, And is there any closing remarks you want to give to us before we end?
I mean, if you want to just if you want to keep on staying up to date with what's going on in terms of my economic outlook, financial outlook, investments, etc., you're more than welcome to subscribe to our free newsletter. It's at wealthresearchgroup.com. And you just sign up on the homepage 3 times a week, and you'll get basically something that's near this interview, but in 5-minute reads.
Very good. I'll post a link to the Wealth Research Group website in the description below. And Lior, I want to thank you again for your insights. Always appreciated. And multitude of gratitude to all of you for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.